Hey guys, Neil Gewirtz with BluefirePoker.com, bringing you part 2 of my coverage of a 2-tabling 50 no limit session. I'm going to pick up right where I left off. At this point, I'm not very familiar with the footage. If you remember, I mentioned in part 1, this was a slightly older video. I believe I played in August. Um, I certainly recommend you guys go back and check out part 1 if you haven't already seen it to see what reads and dynamics have begun developing in these games. It looks like on table 1 we have position on a weaker opponent, and Zinedine over here has jammed all and a lot frequently. He may be on tilt, may be picking up some hands. Table 2, I don't remember too much going on as far as the dynamic is concerned. I'll pause for a second. I'm still considering my 8-9 suited fold from under the gun, which really began the video, and now I'm opening Jack-9 offsuit here. It's only one position later, given that a player is sitting out. I think I would have preferred to make the first open and not make the second one. I suppose, well, I hope I was paying attention. My first stat on the third line is these opponents' fold to steals, and we're actually outrageously high. So now I will take that back about this Jack-9 offsuit open. I actually think that was a very observant play by me. It looks like the right play, and I don't. I'm not gonna go back. I don't remember what it was, 7-8 or 8-9 suited, whatever it was from under the gun, which was actually one seat later because Machi balls is sitting out. Would have been a reasonable open as well. So we'll see if anything's going on here. The 8-4, Ace-4 offsuit, certainly agreeing with my fold. It's not the type of hand I'm going to be fighting back from the blinds with any sort of frequency. The reason for that being a few fold. First off, the stack size I'm pretty concerned about. This player raises with a very tight range, and given that he doesn't have a ton of money in front, it's very easy for him to just stick his whole stack in the middle. And number 2, when I'm out of position, I do have playability concerns as opposed to being in position. I'd value that blocker even offsuit just a bit higher. So we see Lewis over here on table 1 made it 7x pre-flop. Certainly a player who's going to make some big mistakes. Hopefully we're going to be able to capitalize on them at some point in this video. And table 2, it looks like on the very wet flop, I opted to check behind, and in this situation I'm giving up, hoping, that Ricardo is tight enough to give up on that board texture, and my ace high has a bit of showdown value, so I'll be able to win on occasion. I just paused to say again, opening 8-10 suited I do like. Now that I recognize the table dynamics a bit better. Another stat which I've fairly recently added to my HUD is this blue stat over here. And it happens to be blue because I just added it and forgot to change its color, so now it stands out. But it's defend button versus, I believe it's versus cutoff. Although, actually, now that I'm thinking about it a bit more, it actually might be defend button versus any open previous. Either way, his is 0. So this isn't a player who's looking to get tough on the button. It just adds to the fact that, as I mentioned before, these guys' folds to steal are extremely high, and also the button isn't going to be free betting me or even defending against me. So even more reason to be finding those looser cutoff opens over there on table 2. And I'll go off on a slight rant here because nothing's going on. You certainly do want to pay attention to these small things. They really will add a lot to your win rate whenever you're able to exploit your opponents in every way possible, including finding, opening your cutoff opening range by 5 or 10% or whatever. I'm opening it by maybe even a bit more. But, attacking blinds when players will allow you to get away with it, obviously finding with 3 bets, whatever it is that your opponent will focus on in this situation is doing, I suppose I'll say too weakly. And, it's giving up whatever situation we're giving up too frequently in, going ahead and widening your ranges in order to exploit that and force them to fold. We defend our Jack-8 offsuit on table 2. I think that's okay. It has just enough playability where I don't feel like I must 3-bet or fold it. And if I remember correctly, I 8-bet 7-2 offsuit. We have a little grinder tag next to him. What that means in my tagging dictionary is that he plays a ton of tables and is very straightforward. Not a bad player, just someone who makes money at this game by mass multi-tabling as opposed to beating a real tough opponent at fewer tables. So he's going to be opening a bit wide on the button, going to give up on standard board textures, which I'll be able to steal. I believe is correct. I'm sure I had some read where he gives up too frequently or c-bets too frequently, in which case I would take advantage of that as well by check raising. But whatever post-flop read I had at the time, which it seems like, as I mentioned before, I was paying some attention. I'm sure I was planning on exploiting it if I am defending, as Jack-8 is somewhat marginal. And, we also see... Let me see if I can remember. 58% should be his fold to 3-bet, so he's not folding to a large percentage of 3-bets. We'd want to gear our range towards value there. Another reason why I prefer to be calling in that situation as opposed to 3-betting. I would assume we're going to be doing the same thing on table 1. Again, a very small fold to 3-bet, but a button range which is wide enough where I could defend, a marginal high card type connected hand. Obviously, the downside on boards like this, I'm imagining I'm going to check fold. You lose. It's pretty much that simple. When the board comes very dry, check raising just doesn't represent much. You can employ the strategy of check raising queens and bluffs here, something along those lines. Maybe floating out of position. I don't know if a jack high would be a good candidate for it. But the point being, when you do play passively, you want to be aware of how frequently you're giving up on certain types of board textures and have some way of winning that money back or whatever. Including just planning, Jack 10, I think it hits enough boards where this isn't the biggest concern, but I do have to give up with a frequency which I'm not particularly fond of, but I can also... I suppose it's an area of the game I could use a bit of improvement on, is fighting back on these dry board textures. I don't know that my opponents are aggressive enough to really be exploiting it. Combination of their button range and their c-betting frequency. The fact of the matter is, he is probably c-betting frequently enough on that board that I don't have enough hands to defend with if I am playing straightforwardly. So I suppose we'll discuss that just a bit further. I mean, like I said, the options, you're going to have a couple. You can just check raise bluff if, for example, this player is going to very happily c-bet all of his air on a board like this, which I expect he will, and then give up. If he's kind of a, again, weaker, more straightforward type player, it is okay to kind of make just a power play, check raise a queen 6-2 flop, even though no one's all that likely to have anything. If you expect you're up against the type of player who won't think much more about it and will just fold his king 7-2, go ahead and check raise jack 10 on a board like that. The types of hands you'd be looking for, overcards, unlikely on this board. Backdoor straight draws, backdoor flush draws. Jack 10 of spades would obviously be even better. Something like a king jack, but would be good with a backdoor straight draw and an overcard. And obviously the next thing you could do is defend a hand like queen 10, queen jack, and when you do have a hand like queen jack in a situation like this, against a button min raise, even though you have top pair, not a particularly great kicker, you are miles ahead of a button opening range. And if your opponent is tougher and willing to fight back in spots like this, there's nothing wrong with going ahead and check raising your hands like that for value. Just the fact that you have a reasonable check raising range should force your opponent to check and give up with a higher frequency, which again allows you to steal the pot on the turn more often. If, for example, here he opened, let's say, a king 5 of clubs, which really has absolutely nothing, and he knows he check raises you with a, and your opponent knows that he will be check raised a reasonable percentage of the time. He may check and give up, and, for example, the turn 3, you bet and he folds. Whatever the situation happens to be. Point being, your opponent will be checking behind and giving up on the flop more frequently. So either one of those two adjustments are going to be fine if you're concerned about your range being too exploitable. As I said, I have a feeling when I get into autopilot mode and I'm not paying too much attention, I do tend to lean towards the side of being a bit too straightforward. If you guys share that problem. Just as I just discussed. It looks like I'm opting to take my equity on table 2 as opposed to betting to try to fold my opponent off of what he may have. I think I like this play. I mean, for the most part, if my opponent is calling this flop, I don't see a ton of hands which are going to opt to fold the turn, particularly given how short stacked he is and the fact that draws are present, and a lot of them can pick up some equity in 9-10 and Jack-10. Like, if he happens to have check-called this flop with a hand like King-10 offsuit with no spade, it may opt to just give up on the turn, but I don't think he's going to fold a queen on the turn. And, I don't know how many just worse spade draws he has. Something like, I suppose like King Jack, with the King of Spades is an outright worse spade draw. But there really aren't too many of those. Considerably more frequency he has a pair in a draw, and even if it is a weaker pair, excuse me, something like pocket sevens with a spade, I just don't know that I'm getting enough folds to want to try to barrel. So we pick up a couple of big hands here. We'll see if anything happens. I know reef fishing, as everyone folds, is very aggressive from the blinds. I'd be more than happy to 4-bet and stack off in that situation. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Over here on table 2, it would be a more difficult situation against some tighter 3-betters opening from under a gun with ace-king, but again, we just get some folds, not the end of the world. Table 1, that king-8 suited, it would be a spot with the extra money in the pot I would like to open if I didn't have refishing an aggressive opponent behind me, as well as Chickenica's fairly aggressive, particularly in position. So if 2 regs behind me is really the point. I'm not going to mess around with the hand, which is so far from my standard range. I wouldn't be opening king-9 suited there. I suppose I would be opening king-10. Believe that would be that's enough incentive for me to open king 8. It looks like I opt to check behind with the ace-7 as opposed to betting for value. So it is obviously a connecting board, one which I by no means always have the best hands with top pair. Hate to see you go, won't be calling with all too many. I don't even know if that's true. I'm trying to consider whether he has king queen in his range. It's fairly likely, but he should have queen jack, king 10, 10 jack. And he should have king queen some percentage of the time as well. He's not a particularly loose three-better. And given that he likely doesn't want to get all in pre-flop against MHP with king queen, he may see that as a reason to flat call it. And particularly if it's suited and plays well multi-way or whatever, it's very reasonable for him to have that hand. And like I said, he'll have the other combos as well. The one pair plus straight draw hands I'm discussing. And then as far as aces go, if he has ace 10, if he has better than ace 10, he's very likely to pre-bet pre-flop. Ace 9 and ace 8 would be hands which have a beat and are very much in his range, both of their ranges. And then I actually do beat the rest of their aces, and given that MHP is a weaker opponent and Hate to See You Go was getting a good price closing the action, they're actually going to have a very reasonable amount of weaker aces, which I actually have beat here, and like I said, the pair plus draws, which I have beat as well. Also combines with the fact that there shouldn't be a ton of hands which are going to check raise me off my equity. You know, there are a few combos of things like 9-10 of diamonds, or say King-9 of diamonds. In my range, I have aces, queens, 10 in my range, 10s, excuse me, so I have sets, straights, two pairs. Hands which don't have to fold in this situation. A lot worse can check call. I'm not value cutting myself all that frequently. These hands are in their range, I just discussed. But I don't think I'm getting value cut with a high enough frequency to want to check behind here and play pot control. I think my hand is strong enough to just bet and go for two streets, particularly against the weaker opponent. It looks like I do opt to bet pretty big on the river. It's a fishy line. When I check behind them as flop, again, I'm representing 8-pot controlled hands, which I have, which is fairly likely to be a similar range as I gave my opponents, as far as a one pair no kicker, which I suppose is what I'm considering my hand, or maybe a second pair in a straight draw. And now betting big on the river is suspicious, and I would imagine that is my thought process, that I'm looking to hopefully get a hero call from something slightly worse. Again, the things I dislike about this, I don't think this works as a bluff at all. I don't believe ace-8 or ace-9 will fold. And it makes it more difficult, obviously, when I bet bigger for my opponents to call. MHP, particularly a weaker opponent, probably not as much of a thinking opponent, probably just the type of player who, if he has, say, Jack 10, will say, okay, my opponent bet 350 and I have a pair of 10s, I could call that. My opponent bet $6, I have a pair of 10s, I can't. And to add to that, Hate to See You Go, he doesn't have much of a hand here either. I'm really kind of banking on this hero call, and my opponents recognize that I'm taking a kind of full of it line when I actually have a hand which is a good bit better than a full of it hand, but not even all that much better. I think this is probably one level beyond where my opponents are likely at. Again, this session did take place a few months ago, and I'm certainly not as in touch with game flow as I would have been at that time. Maybe I have some sort of dynamic with these guys which I'm not remembering, or MHP was a bigger call station than I remember, something like this. And I'll always kind of throw out there that it's always the thought process of the hands which I go through, which is considerably more important than the actual play. So I'll leave you with kind of all of the considerations I just gave you, and my final analysis right now is that I believe a smaller bet sizing would actually make a good bit more sense in the situation, as opposed to, I'm making a polarizing type bet sizing with an unpolarized hand, probably too advanced, one level past where my opponents are thinking. Again, most likely. And, I mean, I don't know if I'm reading too much into that tank from Hate to See You Go. But if it was legitimate and he did have a bluff catcher, I may have just made it too difficult for him to call with it due to my bet sizing. Can't say for sure. But I do like my analysis of the hands. With ace queen, I may remember this. I'm gonna have to bet and stack off, and why do I have a feeling I'm drawing dead? Against such a weak opponent who's gonna have so many worse hands in his range, semi-bluffs, just worse, like ace-7, no spade. I just have to go up top pair, top kicker. Yeah, not completely dead, but very close to it. When he does check raise big, it very well may discount his big flushes as well. That, of course, being said, previous to seeing his cards at the time, it's just a hand I can consider while I'm making the decision should I go off my hands or not, which, honestly, I don't even know if it's much of a decision. But as we see, I am beat, and should we have enough concern that we are beat to consider a fold, the thing I would have said at that time is if he does have a big flush, queen or jack high, probably, maybe not by 10 high, maybe not. I would think him check calling becomes considerably more likely. Therefore, we kind of discount the flush in his range down to roughly 9 or lower. It takes away a lot of combos of hands which have us drawing dead. And also, given that he's a fish, like I said, if we put his entire range on big flush draws and hands which have us beat, we could find the fold. But I think I'm able to put enough hands which are actually in really good shape against in his range. Like I said, an ace-x, which we have essentially all of them beat. I don't think he'll have ace-king there, and on occasion we run into ace-4, but we have okay equity against it. More likely ace-jack, ace-10, ace-9, ace-8, ace-7. All these aces we have crushed. When they have a spade, we also have them beat, obviously by considerably less, and when they don't, we're a huge favorite. So if we're using that as his entire range, which I was at the time, I think it's the right play. Is it right or not? I can't be 100% sure, but again, given that I have a little fish label next to him, those are going to be assumptions I jump to. We're going to overplay a top pair type hand and have hands which they kind of quote unquote shouldn't in their range, maybe something like 2 6s and the 6 of spades. So given all that, I think it's a no-brainer stack off anyway, but it's always good to evaluate these situations, even if it seems like a no-brainer. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe actually you're able to deduce that the range is strong enough that top pair isn't enough to stack off, but I don't think that's the case in that situation. Obviously, another consideration there would be he was pretty short stacked at the time. So whenever stack to pot ratio goes down, value of top pair goes up. But it's a hand which you should be stacking off against a player who's getting all in with any sort of a reasonable frequency. Looks like I just fold the jack 10 there. I don't dislike it. I actually think that might be the right play. And I don't know if it was last video or a few videos ago, I did discuss calling too frequently with hands like Jack 10 suited at a position just looking to hit flops in situations where it's not quite a perfect spot for it. And the video is short stacked. If they're two full stacked opponents, all of a sudden the implied odds of Jack 10 go way up. But again, Ricardo has been very tight opening pre-flop. He's opened 12% of hands. He's opening from earlier position. We could put him on a range which is too tight to want to free bet and squeeze. Even though we know Chicanica is weak and basically folding 100% of the time, Ricardo isn't, not even close to it. So it really takes the value of a squeeze, diminishes it very much. And then, like I said, as far as a call goes, we're not getting particularly good implied odds against either of these players. I mean, I think Chicanica is going to have a small pocket pair just the vast majority of the time as far as hands he wants to call with, which he doesn't want to free bet and stack off with. And yeah, unless the flop comes like 7, 8, 9, and we flop a straight and he flops a set, we're unlikely to get paid against him, and there's just not enough money from Ricardo, as I've said twice. So even though it seems like a tight fold, and it is on the tighter side, I'm actually going to agree with it. I think it's fine. So we're up against 2 5s and ace 10. Again, I'm not sure if Ricardo folds that or not. We're still up against a pretty tight range. Yeah, we would have expected that to be in it. Likely a situation where he isn't folding more than half his range, and may not be folding that, maybe folding considerably less. Chicanica flatted with the ace 10 offsuit there. It's okay. as far as being in position with a marginally strong high card hand against probably at least a bit of a weaker opponent, uh, assuming his thought process is that he's not going to get in too much trouble on ace or 10 high flops, and will be able to outplay his opponent post flop, and he's not concerned about a squeeze from the blinds. With all of those considerations, I could see ace 10 offsuit being a perfectly fine call in that situation. So, a couple somewhat interesting things happen as far as gaining reads on our opponents. On table 1, Dairyman min bet into I8 bet 7-2 off and folded to a raise. So, definitely something we want to think about and consider. When he very frequently, when we're just dealing with a fish, we can just come to the conclusion that min bets are probably always going to be weak. And we're going to want to raise them pretty relentlessly. On table 2, we saw Ricardo Del Rio overbet when it was checked to him. Probably more evidence that he's going to be playing straightforward. I would imagine he actually had something there and was, in his mind, protecting his hand. I paused it to discuss this ace-jack. I think I do fold. I think I'm remembering this hand, and I think I like it. Obviously our hand suffers extremely from reverse implied odds. We know that I8 bet is going to have a very strong range here, as will MHP. The only positive to calling is that when we do catch an ace high flop, we will very frequently both have the best hand and be able to show it down easily, which I believe is what would have happened. Let's go ahead and, well, no. He bets for pot, and we would have had a nice annoying situation. And the reason behind that would be, I think MHP's range, given how tight his free betting range, something like Jacks plus and Ace King. If he has Jacks, Queens, or Kings, he's very likely to check an Ace High flop, particularly if there were two players in the pot. I suppose if I were in the pot also and he did have one of those two weaker hands, there's some chance heads up he betted and freeways he wouldn't. Hard to say. As well as I8 bet 7-2 off. Similarly enough, if he continues on an ace high flop, we know we're beat. And basically, we're just not going to continue all that frequently on jack high flops. So, also given the price, I could see. I suppose I'm advocating calling with ace jack to catch an ace high flop. And assuming that both players will give up if they don't have it. And if that were the case, I'd probably want to call the hands without an ace in it, and just be able to profitably play from there. I'm starting to, and what I'm getting at is I'm starting to like my play. I think it was a bit too optimistic to just, defend with the hands which suffer so poorly from reverse implied odds, where even when I do flop an ace, I suppose I'd have to fold to MHP, then why am I playing the hand at all? And I didn't, so I think that may have been the best play. We are in considerably better shape with this ace-queen on table 1. Certainly could have free bet pre-flop. I would imagine my biggest consideration over here was that I just hadn't been playing very aggressively at this point. Ace-Queen plays well multi-way, and also refishing squeezes a lot. So a few good things could happen here. If refishing squeezed, I could have jammed all in over his pre-bet. Also, when I do pre-bet with Ace-Queen against these two guys while I'm at a table playing 19-12 with 0% free bet, I'm, going to have a lot of difficulty getting called by worse. So with a hand which will play well enough, even though I'm out of position, I'm okay calling. If I remember this hand correctly, which I think I do, I think I bet turn river. I think I get called by ace king. Let's go ahead and see if this plays out. So now it looks like I have the best hand, just about always. When I8 bet checks this flop and calls this turn. Uh, what sort of a range do I have him on? I think he could have some worse suited aces, something like an ace 5 suited, which is pot controlling. He could be calling once with the hand like likely tens, jacks, queens, or kings. As well as there's some chance that he has a draw. Whether he turns, I'm not sure if he'll call all the turn with fours or fives, meaning just pocket fours or just pocket fives. And I'm not sure he wouldn't c bet the flop. Maybe with like king, queen of clubs, he opts to try to get a free card and is checking with the hand he could check call with. But given that given that range, the majority of his range will be some sort of a marginal showdown value, whether that's a middling to big pocket pair or a worse ace. And here's a situation where I do want to bet bigger and represent the fact that I can have bluffs in my range, as well as, in this situation, my range is uncapped. Whereas previously with that ace 7, when I checked behind on an ace queen 10 flop, all of a sudden I don't have the nuts in my range. So betting big was kind of for a reason of suspicion because I was making a polarizing type bet in a situation where I can't have the nuts. Here I can, and I can also have a bluff. I could have 8-9 of clubs. I could have pocket sevens, and I'm considering ace queen. Given this hand reading exercise, I am considering it to be the nuts because the next piece of my hand reading exercise will be that I8 bet 7-2 offsuit bets ace king on the flop, and let's go ahead and see if I remember this correctly. He does not. He even has ace king of clubs. Yeah, I think he kind of caught himself up in some fancy play syndrome of like I mentioned with the king queen suited, he has a hand which is just strong enough to check call with and never really has to give up on. It certainly doesn't have to give up on the flop and doesn't really give up on. It may have to on the turn. Ace King suited never has to. I can bet it has top pair, top kicker, and the flush draw. Can check call and induce bluffs very easily. However, I think that hand is just too strong to not value bet. Even though it's a great bluff catcher in the fact that, as I said, it can check call absolutely everything. It's also a great value better in that it can keep betting and have the best hands of the vast majority of the time. It can get all in versus dominated hands, smaller flush draws, straight plus flush draws. I don't know if any smaller aces are getting all in. If I'm facing three streets with ace queen there, obviously I'm going to call flop. I think I could take the call flop and turn and fold river line with my ace queen and be happy about it against such a straightforward opponent, but not everyone is going to be folding top pair, and I would have difficulty folding top pair on bet river with the second kicker, given that I split with ace queen, and he could likely still have ace jack and possibly be bluffing. But he may end up getting free streets for me. He may not. It's a very close river decision. You have to really think your opponent is, very infrequently, like I said, either value betting thinly or bluffing on the river to want to fold a hand which is just so close to the top of your range and beats so many other hands. So it's tough to say whether I find that fold or not. Again, kind of point being, I think he got a little caught up in fancy play syndrome and played his hand too passively. Likely have another couple of opens. And I go for the ISO with Queen 10. Certainly with refishing on the button, I can't limp. I think he'll just ISO way too wide of a range if I tell him that my hand is weak as well. So I'm pretty obligated to raise or fold. And against such a weak opponent, I'd very much prefer to raise. With Ace King here, backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw, and I think I'm getting enough folds from random unpaired hands, taking away their equity. I do like my c-bet. I believe I get raised, or somehow it doesn't work out. But With the Queen 10, it appears that I'm using my read, which I picked up before, that the min bet equals a weak hand. And obviously we have our inside straight draw and our 2 overcards to an 8. As well as we have the strongest straight draw, I believe that's right. Yeah, so we beat all other straight draws as well if we want to include those in his range. So I do like my raise here. To discuss table 2 a bit more, I could barrel a jack, a 10, a spade. Not liking the barrel on a 6. He's still not going to be folding a queen. He's still not going to be folding flush draws, although he doesn't have a ton of them. And there's a few more pocket pairs he won't fold here. Mostly 6s and 7s. Maybe if he got stubborn on the flop of 3s, and maybe if he gets stubborn on the turn with 8s. But, our equity didn't improve. And like I said on the flop, there's a lot of merit to betting. We had plenty of turn cards we could barrel, but we did not get one of them. And it seems our read was... Well, it's probably correct. Over on table 1. I was going to say slightly off that our opponent... Excuse me. Our opponent bet called, but, with another min bet... Still, the read was generally a min bet is not a particularly strong hand, and it still seems as if he does not have a particularly strong hand. We do make our hand, so I'm looking to raise a... I like this amount a lot, something which is pretty easy for him to call if he does now have some sort of apparent straight draw. Obviously, if he has a jack, we're going to very likely get his money, unless it's jack 8 or jack 9, or he some other way improves on the river. And if he has just an 8 or just a 9 or maybe 8-9, we want an amount which maybe he can call again, as well as if he has 8-10, 9-10. Yeah, those are... no, is there one more? Whatever it is, a pair and a straight draw in the middle there, we also want to allow him to call it that as well. I suppose 9-7 would be the other possible straight draw plus pair, but a bit more optimistic for a few reasons. And certainly want to be shoving this river. I think he can still have a jack here. I'm mostly going to be getting called by a jack, and again, maybe he gets stubborn with an 8 or a 9. And also I'll throw in, given that he's a call station, and he does have the 8-9 and finds the fold. The only other possible bet sizing would be to bet small and really make it much easier for him to call off his smaller pairs. Given that it's a fish and a call station, I think we could get greedy against a player this week and expect that he will call off his money frequently enough, even if he does have a very marginal hand, as he did. So I'll let it go for just a little while longer here. There isn't too much left in the video as far as my recording goes, and I'm certainly coming up on 45 minutes soon. So we'll see if we can't find another interesting spot or two before calling it quits. It does not look like we have one now, though. I just paused for a couple of minutes. Absolutely nothing went on. There's just a few minutes left at this point, and I'll just play it out, and hopefully something interesting develops. Obviously, we have a reasonable hand in the small blind. I'm not sure we're going to be able to play it. But with about 5 minutes left in the video, as far as both the footage and how long I planned on making this, I'll go ahead and leave it and hope something comes up. So with a small fold to free bet from I 8-bet 7-2 off, opt not to free bet the 5-4 suited on the button. I think that's the correct play. It's considerably better hand to free bet against Shikanika. Um, Also, as I discussed before, when I'm in position, I do look to blocker value as being my higher consideration than, playability deception value, which is obviously what 4-5 suited has as opposed to an ace or a king. Again, on table one, I think I'm largely adjusting to the fact that refishing likes to make plays similar to the one I just did myself, and I don't like limping behind the king 10 offsuit against an opponent who will frequently raise limpers. Obviously, it's just throwing away money. So with a hand which is reasonably strong against Dairyman's range, and obviously fold equity, I'm happy with my raise there, even though I will pretty frequently just complete with the king 10 offsuit in that position. It's certainly something I've discussed before. Obviously fold equity is a very large consideration in that spot. But if I remember correctly, if I know my game correctly, in that situation, I don't think I raised because I expected Dairyman to fold with a particularly high frequency, even though luckily, it worked out well, but he did. Like I said, I think my bigger consideration there was the aggressive player in the big blind. Hmm. Looks like we're down on table one. It's getting to that point in the session, I think, where I'm checking if I'm up or down. I can't imagine I'm up on table two, so I would imagine this is a small, well, hopefully small losing session. Another fold. As far as this session has went, I hadn't found any situations to play back against button opens, and it looks like it's largely been I 8-bet in these spots. Just to quickly discuss that, and then I'll get into that king free suited open. Not that it's very important or anything. I certainly do want to be free betting button openers with a higher frequency than I've shown, but there's no reason to do it with a 10-2 offsuit or whatever total trash I've had in these situations, just because I've been tight. On table 2, I opened to 3x with the king free suited. Against a weaker opponent, I'm happy opening a bit smaller. I'll often open to 4x in that same situation. But I just expect MHP will play much more straightforwardly, will fold a ton of his trash and not be stubborn and free bet main things along those lines. And obviously king free suited has a good amount of playability post flop. Looks like we flop a top pair here, and on a more dry and connecting board, well, than a few previously, I suppose. But the point being a somewhat connecting board, I do opt to c-bet and try to get, I suppose it's somewhat thin value. If I do get called there, obviously I don't expect to be much of a favorite versus any range. I don't beat any tens. I don't know how many sixes and fives are in my opponent's ranges, as far as if they are check calling with a 6 type hand, ace 5, but definitely a situation where I prefer to bet. There is a lot of equity I could clean up with just a pair of 10s on that board. Table 1, we play the hand pretty straightforward. We see, so does I 8-bet. I check behind in a spot where, pot controlled, not looking to get check raised. My hands is good, and also I expect I 8-bet 7-2, to play straightforward on turns and rivers. And as we see, even though my range is likely, very capped, I don't have a straight, I don't have a set, I'm pretty unlikely to have diamonds. The only diamonds I would check back on this flop would be very low ones. If I had like 6, 7 of diamonds, I would check behind. So, there's only a few ways for me to have a flush. All the other flush draws are just huge combo draws, like ace queen of diamonds, or ace high flush draws. Even if there is no combo, is just a much more powerful draw. All those hands I'll bet. So even though my range is extremely capped and I'm not all that likely to have anything, as we see against this opponent, we're able to put our hand face up, and it's not at all a consideration. Just bet the turn for thin value / protection. And, he somehow whiffed that flop, whether it's, a small pocket pair or just some big cards with not much more, no diamond, and not much else to go with it. We were able to get the fold on the turn, which is perfectly okay, with just top pair on a drawing connecting board. Okay, so it looks like I already clicked sit out next blinds. We'll leave this for, well, the next hand on each table. Don't think we're going to be playing that one. And it looks like I decide to play my last hand. Okay, if I remember, this hand actually becomes reasonably interesting. So I see bet this flop essentially just due to my very large amount of equity. Clearly I flopped the nut flush draw, inside straight draw, and overcard. Again, happy to get folds out of a hand like pocket eights with no clubs, which is slightly ahead of me, or I don't know if he has ace-king with no club in his range, or I don't know if he has any better unpaired hands, but we get some better hands to fold, and obviously when called, we're in perfectly fine shape. On the turn, my thought process is that his range is going to have a reasonable amount of value here. Actually, now that I think about it a bit more, maybe I do prefer a barrel. Mostly to fold out 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s with the club, maybe a marginal jack with the club, something like if he has Jack 10 offsuit with a 10 of clubs, may outright fold the turn. Maybe just Ace Jack, maybe like King Queen with, that's not going to fold the turn. But, there are a reasonable combination of hands which will fold, which do have me beat, and again, I have my equity. He's very unlikely to have a full house. So it's actually a pretty good spot to go ahead and barrel as a bluff. I opted to check due to call a lot of rivers, this certainly being one of them. And if we remember, or if I remember correctly, excuse me, he has absolutely nothing. He has 7-8 with the 8 of clubs. So obviously this would be very interesting if we weren't leaving the table. But a very simple adjustment to make against this guy. It seems like he will call flops extremely wide. If you remember, he called the, I believe it was Queen 5-6, right along those lines. Called the Queen 5-6 flop before, when we had Ace King and check folded the turn. Now it makes me realize that this is the type of guy which I do want to be barreling pretty relentlessly against if he is going to be calling flops this light. And here we have proof of it, as far as seeing a 7-8 offsuit and 8 high flush draw. And, now all of a sudden I am very much suspecting it on that queen high flop. He didn't have to have all that much of anything at all. So all of a sudden, 2 overcards, even without picking up our straighter flush draw, may well be enough to barrel with. It's always nice to have a bit more information. Will he call with a hand even worse than an 8 high flush draw? Even more marginal draws. Although I don't know how much more marginal it gets than this. Will he fold them on return to a bet? Obviously, another consideration. But again, the point being, it seems like this is the type of opponent who will call flops extremely light. Uh, so very likely the best adjustment is going to be barreling him more frequently, with the assumption that he will have such a wide range on the turn that he'll be forced to fold it. But kind of what I'm getting at here is we don't fully know that he will fold it, given that he's calling pre-flop with 7-8 offsuit and calling the flop. There's a chance he won't, but that's very often the point where even a loose player is going to give up ace high. So excuse me, 8 high. So I think it would be reasonable to be looking to adjust to this guy by barreling more frequently. So, like I said, this was the last hand of the session. And again, as always, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely feel free to leave any questions, comments, or feedback in the forum. This has been Neil Gewirtz with BluefirePoker.com.